This is the new XPS 13. Now, some of you might be wondering at this point, Eber, didn't you just take a look at one like 6 months ago? I did. In fact, that was the XPS 13 2-in-1, a notebook/tablet hybrid. It was one of the first devices to hit the market featuring Intel's 10th Gen Ice Lake CPUs, and the performance was actually really good. Though I did have some issues with the functionality of the device. Some things just didn't add up. If you're interested in checking out my full review of the XPS 13 2-in-1, I'll leave a link right over here. This, on the other hand, is a standard XPS 13 that's updated for 2020. That's because last year, Dell was offering Comet Lake CPUs on their standard models. And trust me, I can start ranting about Intel's Ice Lake and Comet Lake mobile processor launches, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to find out what's new with this ultrabook and if it's worth the upgrade from something like a basic laptop, or if you're actually shopping for a new ultrabook. All right, so the first thing that I want to tackle is pricing for the new XPS 13. So it starts at $1,200, which isn't too bad if you think about it when you are getting a premium build notebook with efficient specs. In this case, you get a Core i5 1035G1 CPU featuring 4 cores and 8 threads, 8 GB of RAM with wicked fast memory speeds, a 256 GB NVMe SSD, and a Full HD Plus non-touch display. Now you can spec this thing all the way up to $2,000, and these are the specs that you'd get. But the configuration that we have over here is somewhere in the middle, and it costs about $1,750. It would have been nice to see Dell offering AMD options, but I guess one can only dream. All right, so from the outside, Dell hasn't made any major changes to the XPS 13. This is still the best looking ultrabook that money can buy. Crafted from aluminum and then polished by CNC, man, this is definitely something that you'll have to feel for yourselves in hand. It's really that good. The hinge is excellent, it's nice and rigid. I mean, even if you use it as a touchscreen, the screen doesn't wobble. Honestly, it's built like a tank, and it's the little attention to details that Dell has nailed here. I also love the fact that you can open the laptop with just one hand. However, there is one thing that did start bothering me. As you can see, the lip around the screen is not magnetic, which means if you close the notebook, it's not going to stay flush. As you can see, there is quite a bit of gap between the main body and the lid if you hold it in a vertical orientation. This may or may not be a deal breaker, but I thought that it was worth mentioning. The major design changes have been done on the inside. So Dell has expanded the keyboard edge to edge versus the small layout on last year's model. So you're getting bigger keys, which is nice. The biggest improvement, in my opinion, having used the 2-in-1, is the keys themselves are way better. They're not using the maglev mechanism. There's proper feedback this time and a bit of travel distance. If you type a lot, this is a really good keyboard. Unfortunately, the LED backlighting still struggles to shine through properly during low light environments. I personally think this has to do with the white keyboard, because if you're trying to shine white light through a white surface, there isn't proper separation. So if you value keyboard backlighting, I would highly recommend picking up the silver and black carbon fiber model. In fact, that's what I would get, because this Alpine white model costs an extra $50. So that's something to keep in mind. The power button also acts as a fingerprint reader if you're looking for a secure authentication method to log into Windows. They made the trackpad slightly larger. It's still got a glass surface paired with Windows precision drivers, so navigating through Windows was a breeze. I had a fantastic time using the trackpad on the XPS 13. And what's even cool is that the integrated primary left and right buttons sound awesome. This is something that you have to listen to. I mean, how cool is that? I think Dell has really nailed the functionality of both the hardware and the software on the new XPS 13. Excellent job, guys. Now, everyone's been raving about the display on the new XPS models. The XPS 15 and 17 were just recently announced, and it looks absolutely gorgeous. As much as I'd love to get my hands on them as soon as possible, I'm here stuck with the XPS 13, but I'm not complaining, because I have to give it to Dell for stepping things up to the next level. Basically, they've managed to implement a 16:10 aspect ratio into a 11-inch body, and the result of that is a stunning 4-sided bezel-less screen. It's absolutely an engineering marvel, guys. And the best part is that they've kept the webcam where it's actually supposed to be, right at the top, instead of the lame nose cam setups that we're seeing on notebooks these days. The screen itself is another icing on the cake. The resolution is 1920 by 1200, which is perfect, and that's due to the 16:10 aspect ratio. So that means you get more vertical screen real estate when you're working with different apps. It's also IPS, so expect beautiful colors with good contrast. In fact, if you edit photos, this should be on the top of your list because it covers 80% DCI-P3, 100% sRGB, and 77% Adobe RGB, which is really good for a notebook this size. There is an ambient light sensor built in that dynamically adjusts the brightness of the display depending on the exterior lighting conditions, which is really cool. I should also mention that the screen does get really bright. We're talking close to 500 nits, which is awesome. So outdoor visibility shouldn't be a problem. In fact, the weather is slowly getting better outside, so I can comfortably take this with me out to my patio to get some work done. You can also opt for a 4K display that's slightly more color accurate, but keep in mind that that's gonna be an expensive addition. It's just, yeah, it's too expensive. The speakers are located on the side and they sound really good for a notebook this size. In fact, there's more body to the sound depending on the type of genre that you're listening to. I think the only thing that I'm a little bit picky about is that there isn't proper clarity in the details or the high ends, and that's because there isn't a dedicated tweeter built into the notebook, but that's obvious. But honestly, for a notebook this size, the speakers sound phenomenal. So this is the webcam test on the XPS 13. It's not the greatest quality out there. In fact, I don't think we can expect a better quality webcam on notebooks these days, but this should get the job done. The microphone sounds okay. So yeah, it should be fine for casual Skype calls or Zoom meetings. I feel like Zoom is getting more popular than Skype these days, but yeah, it's an interesting fact. Totally off topic though. Moving on to the I/O, and this is where you start making compromises. So you only get two USB Type-C Thunderbolt 3 ports, a headphone jack, and a micro SD card reader. And that's it. Now this setup really depends on how you use your notebook on a regular basis. If you're someone who's relying on external accessories that require you to plug in something to a USB Type-A port, that is something that you're gonna have to make a compromise on, unless if you're willing to accept dongle life, because Dell does include a Type-C to Type-A adapter, which is still pretty limiting because you could just have one of those USB Type-C plugs plugged in for power and then just one of them remaining, which definitely turns to be a limiting factor for a lot of people. But I also understand that this notebook is geared for people who travel a lot and people who don't necessarily use a lot of those ports. It's a debatable topic. I don't think there is a right or wrong answer in this, but I would have preferred to see a USB Type-A port at least on this laptop. But looking at the design of the XPS 13, it's just nearly impossible to include one because this laptop is just really thin. The included power adapter is compact and it matches the Arctic white model. Plus the connector has an LED light notifying that it's charging the notebook, and there's a little light at the front indicating the same thing. It's a nice touch. Also, I'm not sure if this is just me, but I really miss the battery indicator from the older XPS models. Remember the little button on the side that, when you press it, it gives you a little indication as to how much battery life you have left, regardless with your notebook closed. That was just an awesome signature feature of XPS devices. I just really missed that, and I thought that was something just worth sharing. If you're looking to upgrade the XPS 13 later down the line, it is pretty limited. As you can see, the only thing that you can possibly upgrade is the NVMe SSD, and the drive speeds on my sample are good. I mean, they're not the fastest that I've come across. Razer tends to take the edge in that department, but this is still pretty fast. And the battery life on the XPS 13 is outstanding. This thing has a 52 watt-hour battery, and it ended up lasting the longest among our other thin and light notebooks. On our light load test, refreshing a Chrome web page for 15 seconds, the notebook lasted for more than 11 hours, which is just insane. Heavy load scenarios were also very impressive. We ran Real Bench on a loop and it lasted for more than 3 hours. So basically what I'm trying to say is that if you're looking for an ultrabook with the best battery life, look no further than the XPS 13. Okie dokie, time to get into performance. I'm just gonna jump right into it. The Ice Lake Core i7 CPU on this notebook is fast for a thin and light, low power design, especially when it comes to single-threaded tasks. Multi-core performance, on the other hand, is a bit of a struggle, especially compared to Intel's Comet Lake U-series offerings, and that's because those CPUs are still banking on an old architecture with higher clock speeds, so they have a significant edge over Ice Lake in that regard. In some of our tests, the XPS did trail behind the Razer Blade Stealth 13, featuring the same CPU, but honestly, for this size, it's respectable because it's thinner than the Blade. Switching over to some real-world tests, starting with Adobe Premiere, the new update that leverages AMD and NVIDIA GPUs doesn't really come in handy here because this notebook doesn't have a discrete GPU, so render times aren't the best. Ultrabooks aren't geared towards video editors. I mean, sure, you can do some casual work, but nothing serious. For some reason, I'm still having trouble rendering our 10-minute DaVinci Resolve project, it's still a mystery with Ice Lake and this application, so keep that in mind. Now, before I get into gaming performance, I should mention something very important. The XPS 13 by no means is a gaming ultrabook. In fact, there are other options out there offering Ice Lake and Comet Lake CPUs with discrete graphics like a GTX 1650 or a 1660. They'll give you much better frame rates. But if you're just looking for like casual gaming, maybe once in a while, this thing can handle a little bit of that. So let's see how it does. As you can see, with less demanding games like CSGO, Overwatch, and Rocket League, this notebook can push respectable frame rates at 1080p, at medium to low settings that is. But it's obviously nowhere near what discrete graphics can offer, so that's something to keep in mind when you're shopping for an ultrabook. Are you going to be dedicating 50% for gaming and 50% for productivity, or 90% for productivity and 10% for gaming? I think that's the question that you need to answer before making that buying decision. Now, some of you might have noticed that we've started to include temperatures and frequencies over time to see how the CPU behaves under certain conditions and workloads, especially with desktop CPU reviews. Moving forward, we've decided to include them on notebooks as well, so let's see how the XPS 13 does. Starting with Blender, the CPU clock speeds start strong at 3.5 GHz on all cores, but naturally as temperature rises, the frequencies take a dip, averaging between 2 to 2.5 GHz. What's really interesting about the boost algorithm is that whenever the CPU temps hit 72C, the algorithm says, hey, I have thermal headroom, let's boost those clock speeds. And it shoots up to 3 GHz, but that doesn't stay long. Temperatures hit 90C, and the clock speeds dip again, and that gets repeated over and over again. Instead of these peaks and valleys, it would have been really nice to see a balance between clock speeds and temperatures that stays consistent. Switching to Premiere, this one needs a bit of an explanation. Basically, since rendering utilizes both the CPU and GPU, and both are on the same package, they contribute to the overall package power and temperatures. That means the CPU clock speeds take a hit, averaging around 1.4 to 1.6 GHz, while maintaining temps around 73 degrees Celsius. So frequencies seem to be held back by power rather than heat. Exterior surface temperatures were not that bad. It does get warmer when you place it on your lap while rendering files, but it's nothing worrying. Now, with regards to fan noise, this laptop was dead silent under idle scenarios. In fact, on my sample, I didn't experience any coil whines or that weird hum that was a known issue on previous XPS notebooks, so that's pretty awesome. Now, during load, the fans do pick up speed, but it's pretty tolerable. It doesn't sound like a jet fan. So I think it's time to conclude my thoughts on the new XPS 13. And the first thing that comes to my mind is the fantastic design and build quality. This is the gold standard of ultrabooks. It's really that good. The display is also one of the best. It's bright, color accurate. I can't really complain anything about it. I would honestly rock this if I were a student because it's got amazing battery life, good performance, given the form factor. I mean, I think that's what we're all looking forward to when we're shopping for an ultrabook. Excellent performance, battery life, and good design and build quality. And this thing delivers. The price is also very reasonable. Oddly enough, in the reviewer's guide that Dell sent us, I did see a Core i3 model for $999 and another model with 32 gigabytes of RAM. So maybe Dell will offer or launch those models later on. But for now, if you're shopping for an ultrabook, this should be on the top of your list. Or if you're someone coming from a basic $400 to $500 laptop, and if you're looking to upgrade to something like the new XPS 13, you're in for a treat. The only thing that you need to watch out for is lack of I/O, because you're only getting 2 Type-C ports, and if you're willing to bypass that, if you're willing to accept the dongle life by carrying, one of these, I don't have an answer. So on that note, thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys are staying safe and sound. Spend responsibly, my friends. And I'll talk to you guys in the next one.